Welcome to the Today's Leader podcast. Building tomorrow's best leaders, today.
Way to go, guys. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul, I see you. All right, John, let's finish. Coach Cole. Great job, guys.
Hey there, it's Coach Cole here, and welcome to episode 428 of the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. The last couple of years, we've seen every leader face challenges head on. No matter the industry, no matter the field, every leader has faced challenges. And one of the challenges that some leaders faced was the personal prospect of redundancy, restructure, business closure. And today's conversation covers part of the way that leaders have been able to build stronger careers with the prospect of redundancy, or the prospect of doing more with less. Our guest today is Gaj Ravichandra. He's a peak performance coach. He's a mental toughness expert, a mindset coach, a registered psychologist, and the co-founder of Kompass Consultancy, a global talent management consultancy that enables peak performance. So for over 20 years, Gaj has worked with leading organizations, sporting teams, and educational institutions right around the world to enhance productivity, maximize performance, and accelerate career growth. If you are truly looking for a path on how to improve your career prospects, your career growth, today's episode is certainly one to listen to. He has helped thousands of leaders discover their purpose, turning problems into opportunities, and some great tips for increasing mental resilience. So after a word from our sponsor, it's my pleasure to welcome Gaj Ravichandra to the podcast.
The podcast is brought to you by Think and Grow Business, the home of the Think and Grow Business Mastermind. If you're serious about growing your business, get serious and join a mastermind group today. Find out more at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au.
And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome the co-founder of Kompass Consultancy. Please welcome Gaj Ravichandra. How are you, Gaj?
Good, Tony. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
As you know, I'm going to struggle with your name all the way through this for whatever reason. I keep saying to people I'm hopeless with names, but hopefully I'll get it right and I'll keep it right. So tell our listeners the Gaj Ravichandra story.
The Gaj Ravichandra story. So my background really is very much as a psychologist and as a coach professionally. I think a lot of the time that I've spent really working with people was probably grounded in my time as an intern psych when I was involved in outplacement career transition work. I think that really helped me. And the way that I tend to introduce myself is I'm the ugly version of George Clooney from Up in the Air, right? That's kind of the way that I really started off my career. And that was kind of confronting, right? When you're in an environment where you're meeting people who are literally at the lowest point of their professional lives and trying to find a way to help them through that process. I think really gave me some insights in terms of how can we help people at a time like this, mentally, emotionally, behaviorally, to kind of get the best outcomes. And so that was a great learning ground for me. And in fact, it was the Speedo closing of the Speedo manufacturing plant in Sydney, northwest of Sydney, at the turn of this century, where I think I really had that first experience of what it was to have good leadership and perhaps not so great leadership, and to see the reactions of people, being told on the spot that they were going to lose their jobs.
Wow.
And that was quite confronting and to some extent liberating as well, to see how people responded. Yeah.
Is there a general sense of how people respond to something like that? I can just imagine you're working in a career or in a job or a role for, a number of years, 10, 15, 20 years, and then all of a sudden that career transition's a really nice word concept, but the reality is you're out of a job. Is there a general way, a sense of how people deal with that?
Yeah, it's such a varied concept, and I think a lot of that comes back to how we view ourselves.
Yeah.
And I talk about this from the ideology of something called a self map, right? All of us have a map of ourselves and how we look at ourselves based on our beliefs and our values, our experiences, our status, our education. And that combination has this amazing ability to be able to dictate, I think, how we perceive ourselves
Yeah.
in times of crisis or change. And so, in that specific instance, Tony, I mean, I saw a whole bunch of different reactions. I saw people who went catatonic, right, completely frozen with what they just heard. I saw some people who were weeping. They broke down emotionally.
Wow.
Obviously, very devastating to hear that information. Particularly when it's not expected. And then some people who are physically aggressive and angry, right? People picking up chairs. There's a women in their 40s and 50s picking up chairs and throwing them around the factory floor. And so you
Wow.
see these different kinds of reactions. Some who had accepted it to some extent. The full variety. But I think it comes back to how we perceive the world, how we perceive ourselves,
Yeah.
and how we can work through a process with some structure or framework to help us. Right?
And I'm guessing that there would have been a minority of people who felt obligated, compelled. They were in the job. They were maybe scared to take that move on something that they truly wanted to do, and then all of a sudden something like that is forced upon them, and they might have gone, "Whew, what a relief! I've got to do what I want to do now." Did you see that?
Yeah, particularly in some of the conversations that we had with people afterwards. Within the first couple of days, there were some people who had a bit of an enlightening process, right, or period in their minds, and that sort of burden lifted off them to
Yeah.
say, well, what can I do now, and how am I going to then make those steps to work towards that? It's always a fascinating, role that we get to play, and I think I feel very privileged, to have experienced that and still get to experience that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I can imagine. I take it as a bit of a privilege as well. I work with a number of people who have left their corporate environment, whether it's forced retrenchment or whether they've just finally said enough's enough. And they're looking to start their own business, whether it's utilizing their own expertise in a certain area to launch a professional service, or whether it's this brainchild of an idea that they've had for so long. And it really is invigorating and energetic usually to work with those people, because it seems so much clearer to them now once they've gone through obviously those stages of separation with a role. It's almost like the emotions you were talking about was almost like the stages people follow in grief, I'd imagine.
Yeah, the Kubler-Ross cycle, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you focus on peak performance leadership and helping people with careers. Now, more and more, we're getting feedback from people who are leaders, in that mid-level in organizations. I call them emerging or aspiring leaders. They really want to take the next step. They really want to continue to progress, but they want to learn the right way to do things. So let's talk about that leadership as a cohort. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen in your experience with people in that middle management sort of area?
I think there are a number of challenges that come up there. One of the biggest ones I find is fear. I think fear of being able to actually take the next step,
Yeah.
and that unknown, and what it means for me as an individual. What does it mean for me as a family, a member of a family? What does it mean for me in terms of the legacy or the impact that I have on the people around me? And I think that fear, and we talk about it sometimes as imposter experiences, or feeling like a bit of a fraud sometimes, and being able to step into that can be a really interesting dialogue, right, to set up. And I'm sure you get that a lot in the conversations that you have as well. So I think that sort of fear and dealing with self and what is the implication on me as an individual and therefore on the broader team is a big element of that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this is around that sense of, well, what are the skills that I need to develop, right? And this feeling of these technical versus non-technical skills as a leader that I need to develop. I mean, in the old days, we used to call this hard versus soft skills, right?
Yeah.
And clearly now people realize the soft skills are the hard skills. They're the ones that really are difficult because you are sometimes going against the grain of what you have been taught for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so it's relearning. And relearning is uncomfortable. It's a process of discomfort, as we all know. And so the idea that you can pick up a textbook and think that that's going to give you that knowledge, which obviously, we work at a lot of business schools, and a lot of people come into executive MBA programs, and I get slapped on the wrist when I give the induction speech, and sometimes I'm telling people, if you're here because you want a better job and that's why you think you're here, maybe you need to rethink what's going on over these next year or 2 years, because actually it's about developing yourself. And it's only when you do that and you realize that you are a commodity. It is you, Inc., that is actually going out there and creating this opportunity as a leader, or within yourself, or from a team perspective, that's going to make that difference.
Yeah.
I find that realization makes a big difference. Is that something you've realized from your work as well?
It's something that you tend to see quite a lot. So recently, one of the leaders that I work with has been sought out to apply for the next role. So it's public service, and career progression is, from what I can understand or perceive from my involvement with leaders in public service, is maybe the career path isn't as defined, as clear as what we would like to be. Every role's got to be advertised. There's a transparency and there's a process that needs to be followed. But this particular leader was asked to apply for this role that was becoming available. And one of the challenges that she had to work through was she'd built her team to where she felt that they were a performing team, that their conflict was constructive and minimalized the negative and the toxic behaviors. And so she'd put in a lot of work to build what she perceived as a really fundamentally a great environment for both herself and her team. And one of the things that was holding her back from actually taking that next step, that next leap of faith, or going through with the application process, was that I've built this. They're my team. I feel a sense of obligation to them because all of a sudden they're happier and they're more productive and everyone's performing. And I found that interesting because at any stage with her team, if any of them were offered the opportunity, she would be saying, go for it. This is really good. But she wasn't doing that for herself.
Where do you think that was coming from, out of interest?
I just think, there was a sense of comfort that we started to explore. There was a sense of fear of taking that next step. I don't think imposter syndrome was necessarily at play, but this particular leader has gone through a number of teams going through the process. And I think there was also this stage that she got to where she says, I'm always building my team, getting to a stage that we're really good and then moving on. And I think there was a sense of, I don't want to move on now. So there was a little bit of pig-headedness in relation to that. So, but, she ended up applying for the role, but then as what we can often see happen in bureaucracies, they say, good, we'll have a chat to you in May. Okay. So 2 months away. So I find that quite interesting in its own right. So you talked about legacy. How important is legacy to a leader?
It's such a varied extreme, isn't it? I think there are some individuals who are not necessarily motivated by that. And I think the idea of legacy is so different. So for some, legacy is about setting up systems and processes that outlast them.
Yeah.
For others, it's about who can I take on the journey with me and equip them with skills where they can continue to have a bigger impact. Uh, One of the things I find really interesting around that concept is the idea that we have legacy in a linear sense and a non-linear sense. So, for example, the idea of careers, we seem to be applying, in the most cases, a linear context, right? That if I do X, Y, Z, I'm going to get promoted, I'm going to move up the hierarchy, and that's pretty typical.
Yeah.
But we don't live in a world that's linear, right? So the idea that we're applying a linear approach to a non-linear world seems to be a little bit odd. And so, for example, and I'm sure you've seen the same, Tony, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this, is over the last 2 years, particularly during COVID, but even before that, we're seeing this shift from people really trying to determine whether they were wanting to take that linear path and to keep going up that vertical path in their careers. And the idea that there were these things inside them that weren't being fulfilled and weren't going to be fulfilled. So, for example, the idea of having variety in the work that they did, not having a sense of obligation to committing their full time to one employer. Right? And what I've been noticing, and it seems to be coming through in the research, is very much that we're moving to this fractional employment world. The idea that we might be the next 5 to 10 years holding 2 part-time jobs, and that's going to become quite normalized. Now, if that's the case, the idea that we would chase one opportunity and optimize that one opportunity doesn't seem to make sense of the world that we live in. And therefore, what else can we be doing, right, in terms of legacy? Is it about the legacy of me outside my current employment, as well as the legacy inside where I'm currently working? What is the impact that I want to have on the world around me? Is it, some little pet projects now that I want to take to the next level? Is it actually working for 2 corporates at a sort of part-time basis? That's going to make sense. So I think these things seem to be coming up a lot more as people are questioning what they want to get out of their careers and their time.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation because it's not necessarily mirrored in what I'm seeing, but I'm seeing a lot more people doing the old side hustle or the side gig and getting some enjoyment out of that. So, which is unleashing a new set of skills which they can potentially then benefit from within their corporate roles. So I think what COVID has done is provided an opportunity for reflection for people. I've know one of my leaders that I coach who's in the engineering and manufacturing space is so frustrated with everything at the moment, whether it's supply chain or getting stock out of Malaysia and he's been wearing the whole weight of the company on his shoulders now for quite some time. But it's only just in those last couple of months that he suddenly started to realize that that's not doing him too much good. So what are my options moving forward? So he started to explore them. So it took him a while to get to that reflective stage. It took others a lot quicker. But that's what I'm seeing. People are being really reflective on where do I go? What do I do? The loyalty and commitment that I had to my organization is being impacted by everything that's being thrown at, and in the case that I'm thinking of, the engineering space. And they're suddenly realizing the untold damage that potentially is doing to their own health. But yeah, I'm working once again with a number of businesses who have little side hustles, whether it's an e-commerce, whether it's drop shipping, whether it's a professional service, and they're really development of an app. Those sorts of things are what people are saying, wow, it's time I just did this. And maybe that timeline has been squeezed in because of what COVID has created for the world.
And I think we're seeing that also in recent graduates as well around the world, that they are more likely than ever before to take on these entrepreneurial risks and opportunities, and they see that as a way of trying something new before they go to, in inverted commas, settle down somewhere, right? And so the idea that it is not their preferred choice now to go on a graduate program, right? For example, with a big, pharmaceutical company or the Big Four, that they would actually take their chance, and so therefore, that eludes itself to a little bit about, well, what's in my control? What can I influence in my own career, rather than being subjective to what another entity is going to instill on me. So we're definitely seeing this shift, and there's higher, percentage of people choosing, that entrepreneurial path than ever before.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Yeah.
You mentioned self-development and the importance for that. So going through any sort of program isn't necessarily going to get you the next step. It's especially if you don't take on the learnings and do what you should be doing with what you're learning about. What should, if I'm a leader in that middle organization, what sort of, I know that many companies will have personal growth plans or development plans or leadership development programs that they're putting people through. Where's a good starting point for someone that says, look, I want to do something that's different. I want to really start working on, whether it's, we have some people saying work on your strengths. We've got other people saying work on your opportunities. And heaven forbid we call them weaknesses, because that's just not good. We've got people saying you've got to be an authentic leader and admit your vulnerabilities, and all of this in some cases almost flies counterintuitive to what we think we should be doing as part of that our own leadership development. So what's a good starting place for any sort of a leader to sit back and say, look, it's time I grabbed this and started doing some stuff for myself?
Yeah, the typical process that we tend to work on is usually a 3-step process. Right? The first step is really about, the Greek maxim, know thyself.
Yeah.
What is it about me that actually makes me more unique, right? The special qualities, whether it's your mindset, the personality style, we talk about strengths and development areas or opportunities. Having a sense of what those things are is really important. But there's this other thing which I find interesting that's coming up more and more now, this concept of motivated skills. And this is a concept from the 1940s, actually, 1945.
Yeah.
A guy called Bernard Haldane out of Harvard created this process. It's a self-reflection process that actually gets you to understand what are the things that you're good at and the things that you enjoy doing, right? Once you understand those two things, it sheds a lot of light on where do I want to spend my time, because I could spend time on things that I don't enjoy doing or I'm not good at, right? But is that the best use of my time? Is that actually going to differentiate me and make me more unique, right? And I think if you're competing with 7 billion people, let's be honest, there's a lot of people who've got lots of qualities like ours, right? So we do need to hone in on some of those areas. So when we find out what those motivated skills are, then we can use that to say, well, let's move on to the second stage, which is, well, how am I going to sell myself? If I'm a commodity, I'm a brand, whether it's internally within an organization or looking at externally.
Yeah.
How do I sell myself? Is it about the digital footprint that I have? What does that digital footprint look like for me out there, whether it's on social media or different aspects? What does my network look like? And we go through this fun process of mapping the network, of people around me internally and externally to the organization. Do I have the right relationships, right? There was this wonderful study done by Korn Ferry, published a couple of years ago that said for promotion for these middle managers, 30% of the chance of you being promoted is based on your performance, right? 70% are your relationships.
Yeah.
It's your network. And so the idea that, we think our performance is going to get us promoted in these positions, we're working to the minority or the lower percentage chance, right? And so I think, how do we develop those relationships? Which relationships do I need to develop and network with? And understanding my landscape is really important, internally and externally. So I think that's sort of that selling piece. And then the third part is, how do I continue to develop myself?
Yeah.
Right. What are the core strengths? I remember this, this wonderful interview by Ian Thorpe, our great Olympic swimmer, being interviewed and being asked once, you're such a great freestyle 1500 meter swimmer. Have you ever thought about, looking at some other, strokes that you might be able to focus on?
Yep.
And he kind of paused and then said, well, yeah, I could look at other strokes, but then I'm probably not going to be the best in the world at this, right? And so the idea of saying, well, what are you trying to achieve through the process? It might not be to be the best in the world at something, right? It might be just being really happy about being able to go to work, be in a great environment, and that's wonderful, right? I mean, what a great place that is to be in,
Yeah.
if you're enjoying those things. And that might be enough for you, rather than thinking, well, I need to be the best in the world or the best in my industry at something.
Yeah.
And so really trying to understand, the motivational skills behind that and the drive for that is really important. Yeah.
That professional branding or getting to know your network is something that a lot of people struggle with. So they may see someone moving up through the chain of an organization, and it's because of that 70%, it's because of their relationships, it's because of networking. Now, if I'm sitting back expecting my performance to be the deciding factor, I'm probably looking at that person, and I've probably got one or two names that I'm calling them, whether it's a brown noser or,
Yeah.
those sorts of things. So when we talk about that concept of networking, when someone like that's not a natural for some people. Gaj, is it? So let's. How do you work with people to get them to see the importance of that networking, and what it truly means? It certainly doesn't mean being in someone's pocket, does it?
Absolutely not. And you're right. It can be quite unnatural for a lot of us, partly because we have been taught perhaps in the past that is the brown noser type mentality, right? And therefore the mindset reflects, that thinking process.
Yeah.
So another way that I tend to look at it is actually not to call it networking. It's about relationship building. That's all you're doing, right, in that process. And therefore deciding what relationships you would like to develop. Now, there might be some people in the organization, and we work with some top tier, management consulting firms, people who are trying to get to partner level, within the organization. They just don't want to be in that situation where they're going to have to, for a better word, suck up to certain senior partners, right, within the organization. Those senior partners want certain kinds of behaviors to be able to reaffirm that they are in the right place and to promote them. And so from a values perspective, it doesn't seem to fit, right? And so individuals have to work out whether that is something they actually even want, right?
Yeah.
To get promoted in the first place. What is that going to entail? Then what are the relationships that we need to actually, nurture and develop? And I use a bit of that Gary Vaynerchuk, model, where he talks about give, take,
Yep.
right? If I'm going to expect something from someone, right, that they're going to talk high of me at a promotional meeting, what am I giving to them in terms of value?
Yeah.
Right? From a genuine perspective, not with a view of just wanting a promotion, right?
Yeah.
Am I actually helping them in some way or giving them something that is, genuinely something I want to do? And so you find the people who you want to do that for.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it a little bit easier to get into the habit of actually starting to develop those relationships and then starting to map that network. In fact, LinkedIn tells us, right, the stat is that for every direct contact or network you nurture, that there's about 250 other indirect relationships, right, that you nurture. So you don't actually need to develop that many to have a broad reach. So this perception that I've got to be out there networking every day and doing this all the time is simply not true,
Yeah.
right? So I think we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves, right, to do that, but it can be a handful of people that actually can help us. So it is truly about quality rather than quantity here, in terms of that.
It's a changing landscape in relationship to, say, something like LinkedIn and networks. We spoke with a LinkedIn expert recently, and he talked to me that his connections are purely customers. So he knows that they're purely customers or potential customers. Everyone else that he doesn't know becomes a follower. So and so he makes that distinction within his branding and within his business really, really clear. Now, and one of the things that those people in organisations, because I suppose our default situation is that it can't possibly be my fault why I'm not being promoted. There's got to be something that person's doing. But what they sometimes fail to see is the work that's being put in by that person. I've seen leaders pull through organizations. So as one leader takes the next step, all of a sudden you see the people that have done the job for him and also have that relationship of trust go along for the ride. So there's that, and that's not about brown nosing. That's about relationships and performance. One of the mentors that I had would always talk about a very simple process. He would always say, act as if, and I'd look at him blankly and say, well, what are you talking about? And he'd say, you've got to act as if you've already got the next role. So you've got to understand the skill set that's needed for the next role. You've got to understand the relationships that you need to have for the next role. You've got to understand the professionalism and what succeeds in that next role. And you've got to develop that within yourself before you actually take on the next role, so people can see it in you before taking the next step. Now, was that good advice, or was that
That's very solid advice. Absolutely. I think that's, you're getting them to think beyond themselves and out of their current state. And I think what's wonderful about that is it can create a bit of discomfort, right? To imagine themselves in that situation. But then the more, as we know, with human nature, the more that we are mentally in that space, the more comfortable we become.
yeah
And so the more risks that we're likely to take, the more variety that we're willing to take.
yeah
And so absolutely, that makes a lot of sense to me. And that approach, it can be obviously a phased approach, right? So I'd imagine that there would be some steps and sequential steps that
Yeah.
someone would take as part of a plan, to do that.
Yeah.
So eating an elephant, one piece at a time. And so therefore it reduces that level of anxiety or stress, right? As we think about that next opportunity, for sure.
and being able to self-identify some of that. But one of the key foundations is that you still got to be succeeding in your role. So it's no point developing your skills for the next role if you're not performing at your current role. So that was also
Absolutely.
drilled into me pretty much. Gaj, who's inspired you in your journey?
I think I've been very fortunate, Tony, with a number of people in my life. I've had some senior leaders at the very beginning of my career, people like Sarah Mellish, who was my first ever sales director when I came on board, who fundamentally changed the way I looked at sales as a psychologist. I mean, I was never taught about sales as a psychologist, right?
Yeah.
Then I had other influences in my life, certain individuals, Ian Campbell, ex-Olympian for Australia, who, phenomenal in terms of sort of the commitment, persistence, resilience that he demonstrated, and the mateship, that we forged while I was overseas. I think the individuals that I also get to meet every day who are grinding, the people who invest, for example, in themselves on these executive MBA programs, who are juggling so many things because they have taken a risk. They want to look for a better future for themselves and their families. I think about their lives, the lack of sleep, the amount of commitment that they've got to make, and on a daily basis. And that's quite phenomenal. We talked a little bit before about individuals who've lost their jobs, through restructure and so forth, and how they go about the change process, how they manage themselves, how they turn up every day thinking positively about the future that they want to hold for them and their families. I get inspired by that. I think we're both very fortunate we get to meet people like this, right, on a regular basis. And I walk away from each of my sessions, feeling usually pretty positive about human nature. Then I go turn on CNN or Fox News and realize that's not necessarily how other people see the world.
Yeah. We get the opportunity to energize ourselves with the people that we work with, and I think that that's always and such a positive in my life. I love the teams that I work with. I love the leadership teams that I work with. I love seeing their joy when I'm with them, and their eyes lighting up when they finally get some things or work through something that's been troubling them. So I think that that's a real positive, and it's part of what we do, I guess, isn't it? Otherwise, we don't do what we do. So
I enjoy it. Yeah.
Tell us about your relationship with failure.
I have a love-hate relationship with failure. I hate it at the time, and then I love it in hindsight, right? I think and maybe that's pretty typical for most people. I failed a lot in things that I've done, and that is because I've tried different things. But it took me a long time, to be honest, Tony, to to change that mindset around failure. And I've come from an immigrant family into Australia where, there's a lot of pressure to make sure that you try to exceed and do well and perform, not just for yourself and your family, but your community, right?
Yeah.
That you were coming from. And I think having some earlier, moments of failure demonstrated a couple of things to me. One is they're not finite, right? And so therefore, you can learn from those experiences. The world continues. People tend to move on. And then trying to determine what am I going to pick up and move on with was really important. I think also with failure, having the right support mechanism around me was really important. And so I needed to have some good people that I could talk to, that I could, have those conversations with, that would, bring me out of the funk that I might have been in. I've got a friend of mine who calls it his tribe, right? He has a tribe around him that he knows he can rely on, good times and bad times. So I think those two elements of that variety and risk, but also having that support base around me, really supported me around that sense of failure or not achieving what I wanted to achieve.
Yeah, excellent. So many good little bits of advice that you've provided there, Gaj. So what about your vision for the future? Tell me, what does that look like?
For my personal future or
for yourself and for the organization?
Yeah. So our business, we just went through a rebranding process. So we went from being a talent management company to purely a coaching business. So we help people through coaching. We also train coaches for people to become coaches. And that was something that, we really had to, as a partnership group, decide on, together, because it really shifted our focus, but it made it much cleaner for us. Our view is to help 1 million people over the next 10 years. That's our goal. And so we're looking at how do we scale up our business to be able to impact people through the digital products that we're creating, as well as, the face-to-face time. I've really missed face-to-face time. I've really been struggling dealing with this sort of, visual sort of, the lack of micro behaviors that we get to watch and that physical contact and everything else that, we really love. So I do want to get back to that and spend more time, face-to-face in front of people, which would be wonderful. So I think our vision is about how do we provide more products around these leadership performance and career elements that can support people and give them some tools, some frameworks, that can really help them. Because I do believe that we're moving to a world where we're going to become more individually dependent on our own brand.
Yeah.
We're not going to have our brand associated with a company. I'm not going to be a Commonwealth Bank employee and that's my brand, right? It's going to be more about us as an individual and what we take to the opportunities. And that's a bit of a shift in how we think about things.
It is, and it's a bit of a shift that needs to happen for a number of leaders with their social media profiles, that understanding that what they're posting or what they're agreeing with or the arguments that they're getting into are all visible to just about anyone. So, and it's about understanding and comprehending what is the brand that I have and what do I want to be known for. So, because sometimes going down the rabbit hole in Twitter is just not a good thing to do, right?
Absolutely.
So how can people connect with you, Gaj?
They can find me on LinkedIn under Gaj Ravichandra. I do have an Instagram profile that I use very reluctantly, but I do post some things on there. I've been told recently, my daughters have been telling me to get on TikTok, so I think I need to equip myself with some skills there, Tony, so I need to improve that. But most people can reach out via our website at Kompass with a K, kompassconsultancy.com, or through LinkedIn is probably the best ways of contacting us.
Excellent. Yeah. And we will have those links in the show notes. And today's leader is on TikTok, and we just take little snippets of what we do and share it in the TikTok formula. And we're not into doing any dances or, parading around half naked. We just do what we do and we put it out there, and it does increase the audience. So it is a very interesting medium. So Gaj, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today on the Today's Leader podcast. Thank you for investing in today's leaders.
Thank you. Appreciate your time and everything that you do, Tony.
And now, It's time for Tony's 2 cents.
Being let go. It's something that some leaders would find absolutely horrifying, while others would find it a blessing, exciting, stimulating. But one thing that is really clear around that prospect is the emotions that you may feel. And the emotions that you uncover and discover during those times. It's always important that we acknowledge these emotions that we feel during these times, but not to lose sight of the fact that building your career is also quite often a tsunami of emotions as we progress from where we start to where we ultimately believe we need to be. Our careers are consumed with emotions. But for you to be successful as a leader, the ability to be able to master your emotions and to become skilled at concepts around mental toughness, emotional intelligence, will stand you in good stead right throughout your career, no matter what it is that you face. As always, I'd like to thank Gaj for investing in today's leaders, and of course, his links are in the show notes. If you're looking to build better leadership skills, check out the Today's Leader website at todaysleader.com.au. We really are driving a leadership revolution to build tomorrow's best leaders today. Today's Leader is a collective, the mindset to make a difference, the ability to create an impact. Think and Grow Business hosts our Today's Leader Masterminds. Think and Grow Business, where we focus on personal, professional, and business growth. Book your free 30-minute discovery call right from the homepage at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au. Don't forget, wherever you are standing stronger, braver, and wiser. Don't forget the golden rule. Don't be an arsehole. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.